At the end of 2020 with Alpha 3.12, tractor beams were added to Star Citizen, and at first it was just a cool novelty addition to a task that we already did, courier missions. But a couple months later in the delayed 3.12.1, Xenothreat introduced a new combination of gameplay mechanics. With ship and FPS combat taking place in the same space as cargo efforts, all requiring teamwork and communication, the tractor beam felt right at home and made sense. The game gave us a reason to need the tractor beam that didn't really exist for the 2 months prior. In Alpha 3.19, the next push with this feature begins, and there's a lot coming in the next update and beyond. And almost any type of gameplay you are looking into will be affected by these features. So today I'd like to show you how tractor beams are changing gameplay in Star Citizen now and in the future. Thanks for coming to my Tomato Talk. As far as feature implementations go in Star Citizen, tractor beams have been one of the best. First introduced in Alpha 3.10 as a bespoke single-function mineral sweeper, they quickly became their own fully fledged feature in 3.12, with the ability to interact with FPS weapons, pieces of armor, utility equipment, cargo boxes, and incapacitated or dead bodies. It was immediately useful for looting and fun to experiment with, seeing what vehicles could tug you around or catching missiles as they got launched from ships. The tractor beam, for the most part, was a straightforward feature implementation, with few major glitches, valid sandbox applications, and a pretty clear function that could expand to more in the future. That future potential was also a bit of a curse, as it tends to be with Star Citizen. The tractor beam was only available in the form of a multi-tool attachment, thus the actual usefulness was limited in power. This tool could provide 2.5 kilonewtons of lifting power for the healthy citizen, but that would be quite limiting in a game with so much scale, despite what some may say about realism.
It's actually all based around force, so I know JJ in one of the ICs called out that it has a weight limit of 250 kilos. Technically, that's true, but it's actually a force limit. So 250 kilos is different in Earth gravity than it is in space, than it is on the moon. So the tractor beam has a force limit of 2,500 newtons.
At about 255 kilograms on Earth, if you think the tractor beam should only lift as much as a normal human, you're already well out of luck, and you'll be very disappointed in the future. In fact, until that full-size tool or the ship options we'll be talking about later in this video are in the game, the multi-tool will receive a buff to lift larger objects than it normally will be capable of, but I don't expect that buff to be lasting very long. Also good to remember is that the tractor beam limitations mean a larger object than you in space will drag you around, offering players an additional method of movement in space around space stations and in zero-G environments. This whole conversation around gravitational variety is interesting though. Whether you're in space, on a moon, or a planetary surface, that tractor beam tool needs to work for you, and sometimes you may have no problem lifting a box at the beginning of your route, but need to use a tractor beam at the end, or even a vehicle-mounted beam. So this 2.5 kilonewtons of lifting force is more than it seems, but it's also still a hard limit that could be a problem with the bigger loads. And that's for the same reason as always. Priorities. As the game is built, the importance of each feature undergoes a triage of sorts. Certain features call for other integral dependencies to be completed, such as refueling requiring docking to work or item selling depending on the inventory being implemented. Other features can open up a hole in the game that requires another feature to be sped up to assist, like the crafting addition that was needed when salvage was brought into the game, or how soft death was needed after the cargo refactor allowed for the persistence of cargo. The tractor beam function was kind of a bit of both. There haven't been any major developments in the size of things we interact with since then that would require an upgrade in the technology. It's still mainly just bodies and boxes. Likewise, there weren't any major vulnerabilities or holes in the gameplay that a larger tractor beam would have needed to fill. Anything large that needed to be moved would just disappear eventually anyways. Both of these things are changing in major ways this year. We've already seen the start of it. Now in Alpha 3.18 with the cargo refactor ushering in soft death, the need for easy, reliable access to a tractor beam has become much more important due to the realistic possibility of stealing or, just transferring some cargo between ships. And ship salvage, a feature released in the same update, has pointed at the necessity for tractor beams that can move ships to a desired location for scrap. Actually, combining the two with persistent entity streaming, arguably the most important part of 3.18, we have a serious problem with ships piling up outside of space stations and blocking players from easy access. These are just some of the reasons that have come up that call for the expansion of tractor beam functionality this year so far. If you've been following my videos over the last few months, you know there are quite a few other significant features and gameplay styles coming this year that make the case even more clear. Let's take a look at how Star Citizen is updating tractor beam technology this year and when exactly it might be happening. The idea that a tractor beam update would have a fundamental impact on Star Citizen isn't a crazy idea, given the obvious importance in a zero-G environment. But just starting with additions coming in 3.19 is enough to see the potential. In the next update, tractor beams are scheduled to see a change to interact with weapon items and ship components. The next milestone in our march towards physicalized damage, which I made a video about last month, is physicalized components. And this update will turn them into actual objects which interface with our ships in custom varieties, receive damage, and carry value. This physicalization of components is our next Xenothreat moment. Rather than just taking boxes from ships you've soft-deathed in 3.18, you'll be able to grab their weapons and components as well. When I made my video detailing all the parts of salvage gameplay last year, I said physical component retrieval would likely not be the next step in the profession, and I was wrong. I think these components and weapons will be the most valuable form of salvage, likely netting hundreds of thousands of credits from a good untouched find. Hull scraping will become complementary. This and hull munching are where the real salvage is at. And if you're trying to help ships before they get soft-deathed, this single addition unlocks a very realistic mobile space restock business. With a pile full of weapons, components, subcomponents, and even laser heads, you could travel the game partying up with citizens and exchanging parts for money. You could even get the weapons and components that are traded in repaired to sell for new, becoming a makeshift repair person as well. And this is only step one. With the right escort, the possibilities of restocking ships in Pyro could be incredibly fun. And as I mentioned, when these tractor beams come to mining, you'll be able to trade components and lasers for different combinations to get different attributes after you've used up all the refills on a component. It was pretty annoying having to fly back to a station for that. And with new mining updates in 3.19 beginning a wave of diversification and a new emphasis on resources and materials, maybe there will actually be more reason to diversify the minerals you're mining. But there's also another big question regarding mining. Can the Prospector's mining bags be transferred to other ships? The jury is still out on that one, and likely will be until 3.19 is closer, but I think it's almost a guarantee that we'll be transferring mineral bags when the next cargo refactor hits anyways, which we'll get to. This same mechanic is confirmed to be working for refueling though, allowing tractor beams to transfer fuel tanks between starfarers, allowing for an even more complex refuel logistics chain, whenever refueling gameplay has its own Xenothreat moment. In the improvements to bounty hunting, piracy, and exploration goes without saying here. In any situation where you might come across a long-lost derelict, a target you've destroyed, a target somebody else has destroyed, or just a random ship, the possibilities are much higher. The free ability to change your weapons, cargo, and components is liberating, and continues to build on the second lives ships have, even after players have wasted their own. But that's just what we're seeing in 3.19 with these physicalized components. Going beyond this, we start to learn about the scaling up of tractor beams. With a hard 2.5 kilonewton limit on the tractor beam attachment at the moment, there is a lot of room to offer options, trade-offs, and choices. The first thing you should know is that your multi-tool, your armor, your weapons, just like your ship, will all need power. Don't forget this is a sim, and in space, power, fuel, and oxygen matter. The charge and drain feature is one they've been waiting to implement that will require things like manual overrides and keeping an eye on power levels in your items and weapons. And along with those power levels, fuel will be important as well. EVA fuel will, in the future, no longer be unlimited either, pushing players to consider if a simple multi-tool is going to get everything done that's needed.
Okay, I've got limited fuel in my EVA pack, so I don't want to be stuck out in the black without fuel. And then it's like, okay, I've got a limited battery on my multi-tool, but maybe I'm using that multi-tool for salvage purposes. Maybe I'm using it for cutting. Maybe I'm using it for healing. Maybe I'm using it for the tractor beam. So all of a sudden, you've got a limited use tool that has multiple uses in gameplay, but could potentially get you out of a bind, or if you need a long range grapple hook and EVA. And then you've got 0G push pull. Now 0G push pull, the fundamental of it's free, so it's just under your own effort. You're not consuming a resource.
So with 3 methods of traversal in space, it may be the case that your multi-tool isn't cut out for the job. Similarly, what you want to move may just be too big. Thus, the standalone tool exists. First visually introduced back in 2021, this tool was meant to be the actual tractor beam. If the multi-tool is your Swiss Army knife that allows the casual player to do a little bit of all the professions, this tool is your purpose-built specialty device that cargo haulers and deck crew can carry for any lifting needs. This tool won't be coming in Alpha 3.19, but it is getting close with a likely need for it when the next cargo refactor is released. At this point, there is no knowing where it will slot in terms of power, but I imagine this tool will more easily carry a 4, 8, and maybe even 16 SCU box, while the multi-tool attachment would handily lift a 1/8, 1, 2, and maybe 4 SCU box. Remember that all values are based on lifting force, not weight. Weight will also depend on the specific material packed, so there will be quite a bit to consider for players who want to be the most efficient cargo haulers and packers, thus cargo hauling gameplay at its core. But we're getting distracted. There are also vehicle tractor beams, which will be used for larger 32 SCU cargo boxes, and other ships either disabled or escaping the atmosphere. This will begin with the Argo SRV, which is getting close to release and will be used as a tugboat, a ship that can move derelict ships, pesky leftovers around stations, mineable asteroids, and other things around space. But that's just part of the story. Vehicle tractor beams also include a handful of ships with utility mounts that could allow their use. The Cutlass Black, 315P, Caterpillar, Nomad, Constellation Taurus, Argo MPUV, and more can all benefit from tractor beam functionality on vehicles. And all of this has only really been a look at the sandbox potential of these additions. Even missions could spawn from these features. Missions for any player to gain AUEC by hauling an abandoned ship out of local space station area would be a great way to incentivize keeping areas clean, give beginners missions, and provide gameplay. The same type of missions can also be done with mineable rocks and salvageable wrecks as well. We've already seen in 3.19 that an AI entity will give you coordinates of a wreck that you can go salvage. All we need is for the game to prompt another player to be the one to deliver that wreck. And as more foundational features like tractor beams continue to expand, these gameplay opportunities will do the same in some pretty exciting ways. All this is a lot of good news, but there are still quite a few unanswered questions as always. While I don't believe the tractor beam tool should be limited in weight based on human carrying capabilities, I do think there are some gameplay opportunities for a mounted gun versus a handheld one or vehicular one. I think a Greycat Rock or DS with a tractor beam instead of a mining tool could make great use of something like this and allow for both players to be doing something at all times. We also don't know how weight cutoffs will work with these tools. The multi-tool attachment is pretty weak, but could it be weaker? There definitely needs to be a reason to use the attachment tool or vehicular model, just like there might be for a mining laser or ballistic cannon of whatever different size. We also don't know how these beams will be blocked. Of course, with ships, as is true with mining lasers, salvage beams, or regular guns, your shields will be crucial in blocking these beams. And when it comes to items, you can also lock items in place to avoid party and crew members messing with you for now. But how will players block these tractor beams in the future? The devs have acknowledged the griefing potential and will make sure we can resist it, but we just don't know how yet. So there are definitely these and many other questions to be answered, and hopefully they all will be soon. But it continues to look like 2023 is a fine year for expanded gameplay, and I look forward to the many different ways this will improve the game this year. If you'd like to follow along on development and news in Star Citizen, consider subscribing here for more and checking out my second channel for gameplay, podcasts, and other news. Also consider hopping onto our Discord server and chatting about these topics and playing with us a little bit. It's a pretty good group of folks. I hope you learned something new in this video, and I'll catch you in the next.